Thank you all for joining me tonight for this fairly new webinar. Haven't given this one before. This was one that I wrote for a library presentation for a birding club. So fairly new, only been given once. My name is Lisa Klein, and I am with UJ Extension Gwinnett, and this is part of the In the Garden series. You might get a little bit of anything and everything here. This one's about birds as pollinators, but since we are part of agricultural and natural resources, it can be anything. That takes up a lot of everything out there. So kind of whatever I get going down the rabbit hole. But I appreciate you coming and spending the next hour with me. So hopefully you'll get a little bit of knowledge out of what I present. I always love to be able to share interesting factoids with folks, and hopefully you walk away with a little bit more knowledge than you did before. So this one is birds as pollinators, a hidden ecological force. So I know most people kind of think of pollinators as bugs. Usually it's just bugs, but there are lots of other things out there that are pollinators. In North America, mostly insects are going to be what you see as pollinators, but we got a little bit of this and that out there that will pollinate your fruits and your vegetables and ornamentals and things like that. Right. Okay, so why does pollination matter? Well, pollination matters because about 80% of the world's flowering plants, and remember, we're only in the temperate United States or North America. Most of tropical, the southern part of the temperate, semi-tropical, down into the tropical regions of the world, those are going to be where you see the vast majority of pollination and fruits and tropical fruits and things like that. But 80% of the world's flowering plants rely on pollinators. So that sounds like, oh, that's a lot. Is that, insects? Is it, well, that's a good question to ask. So you have about 2% of the pollination that's going to be water pollinated, meaning probably water plants, the pollen will fall into the water, it floats down to the next plant. Sometimes it's wind pollination. Something you may know about is corn. Corn is wind pollinated. It's not relying on insects, it's wind pollinated. But there's a lot of other plants out there that are very reliant on pollinators. And so that's kind of what we're going to look at here. We're going to look at a little bit of the different groups just so you can get an idea of what is out there pollinating. And then we're going to take a deep dive into birds specifically, because there are an awful lot out there, and some of them you probably didn't even realize that they fill that ecological niche. So obviously, pollination is going to be very essential for plant reproduction. How many people saw Interstellar? Okay, well, there was a blight that kind of took over the world, killed off most of the monoculture agricultural plants, corn, the other stuff that we use, and eventually, without plants, you kind of die. So that's where most of the oxygen is coming from. And that's what plants do, is they reproduce. And how do they reproduce? They have flowers and then fruit and so on and so forth. So it's very essential. You have your annuals, your perennials. Annuals want to complete that life cycle in 1 year. Perennials every year. Biennials every other year, that kind of thing. So it's going to support food webs. You can't get much more basic than that. Just like humans feel the need to reproduce, so too do plants. And pollination is going to drive that ecosystem. So, you have your plants, which make their own food essentially, and then the insects and other animals that feed off of those plants, including humans. We get a lot of fruit and vegetables from plants. So they're very important. Vital for human agriculture. About 35% of global crop production is going to rely on animal pollinators. Animals meaning, mammals, insects, any one of those, okay? And pollinators are very good ecological indicators. And you'll see some of that as we're going through in the different types of birds, the different species that are out there doing that. Some of them are very specific, some of them are more generalist. All right, so let's take a look at what kinds of animals are pollinators or what types of pollinators. So, for those that maybe are involved with the Great Pollinator Census, you probably already know because that's a big thing. We go through a little bit of like which types of animals are pollinators and then we break them down even more. We're mostly looking at insects, and so that's what we focus on there. But there are a lot of other animals out there that do that. So, of the insects, you've got bees, and I mean, you can have honeybees, you can have mason bees, you can have leaf cutters. I mean, there's all sorts of bees out there. Butterflies, um, tons of butterflies, monarchs, swallowtails. You see a few of them here. Beetles, those are kind of clumsy pollinators. They a lot of times will be out at night, attracted to kind of whitish, spicy smelling flowers, but they're not like super efficient at it. And then flies. So hoverflies and some of the mimic bees that are actually flies but look like bees, and bottle flies, which most people think of them as garbage flies. So they're all going to be attracted to different types of plants. They're all going to have similar mechanisms for storing that pollen and getting it where it needs to go. And those flowers are going to use those methods for the pollination, for getting the pollen from one flower to the next. Bats. So we don't have any bat species here in North America that do any pollinating. Um, really. There are a few incidentals, but most of these species, especially the larger ones like you see here, those are going to be in tropical regions. So probably more, I guess, along the equator islands, South America, Central America. You do have a little bit, the only one really in southwestern United States and Arizona, but that's almost into Mexico. And then, of course, islands, the Pacific Islands, Guam and Samoa and Australia, flying foxes. That's actually what the picture of what that one is, a flying fox. They're very large, probably about the size of a small dog. So it's a big bat, but perfectly harmless. They just eat a lot of fruit. And very popular with cacti flowers, but also bananas, mangoes, that kind of stuff. Obviously nocturnal, but very prolific, I guess, in tropical and desert ecosystems. And then the other pollinators, those are going to be your small mammals like possums, and not with the O. I'm talking possums as in Australian possum, which leaves off the O, completely different animal. And then you have lemurs, and you can see the little day gecko up there. And then humans. We sometimes get out there when we're trying to exclude insects and we hand pollinate. So, yeah, you can count humans in there as well. These are all pollinators. All right, so the last class is birds, and that's what we're going to focus on today. So you probably, when you're thinking of birds, you're probably thinking of maybe hummingbirds. That's the biggest one, but there are others. So bird pollination is called an ornithophy, and birds actually pollinate thousands of different species of plants. Some of these are visited by insects, some of them are not. They are strictly bird pollinated. So it's kind of interesting. We're not going to go into a super deep dive on that, but there's plenty of information here, so don't worry. This is going to be most important in tropical and subtropical and island ecosystems. So, one thing of note here is that you probably have noticed that most of the bird species that you know of, and a lot of you are probably here because you're interested in this kind of thing, but they're going to have a beak that's very specific to whatever their food is. Bird pollinated plants have higher speciation rates. That means that they're going to go through an evolutionary process much faster than you typically would see. So, think of Darwin's finches. That's probably the most prominent example I can think of. So the beaks changed very quickly, and these birds were very isolated, and so speciation came very quickly there. Um, but it also can be a problem, and you'll see that with some of these birds, is that they are fairly isolated on islands and some other areas. And because they're so isolated, they're very specific to whatever they are feeding on. And if there is a problem, like humans come in and clear an area out for agriculture or a city or whatever, remember, a lot of these are tropical. Um, you don't have that bird anymore because they're very specialized to that one particular plant or very specialized to that one particular area. So a lot of these birds are highly endangered because of that. So, you know, come with me here and we'll learn a little bit about some of the different birds, most of them outside the US, but it might inspire you to, try to do a little bit more where you can, or maybe go off and do some traveling so that you can see them while they're still here. All right, so bird pollination versus insect pollination. It's kind of fascinating. So, this I'm not going to go and list everything off on. I like to put a lot of information on my slides, and these slides are, of course, available to you if you wish a copy at the end of the presentation. I'll have my email address on there. Feel free to email me and request a copy of the slides. Of course, if you're going through, I have the chat, or sorry, I have the volume disabled. You're all muted. So, but if you have questions, you can certainly put those questions in the chat box and I'll get those at the end. But I try to put as much information on here as possible because you can always hear me talk, but having it right there so that you can go back and look at it later if you like that kind of thing is definitely that's not a substitute for me just talking and sharing and not having it there for you. So color preferences, that's, I'll pick a few things out here. So color preferences, mostly with birds, you're going to find that bright reds, oranges, and yellows are going to be the colors of the flowers that birds are attracted to. Whereas insects are going to be blues, purples, whites, and other UV color patterns. We call those nectar guides. So I've given several presentations that will talk about nectar guides. Those are all up on our YouTube Metro Master Gardener channel, and you can go learn a little bit more about them there. It's very interesting. Under UV light, you can see white versus kind of a purpley color, and it's almost like landing lights for insects. So that's what I say when I mean UV patterns. Now, that's not all inclusive. There are plenty of flowers that are yellow or other variations of colors that bugs are attracted to just as much as birds, but this is kind of you can guarantee if it's got reds, oranges, and yellows, you're probably going to have a hummingbird, at least here in the US, visit it where we are. Scent. Birds aren't really attracted to scent. So if you've ever noticed that with squirrels and bird feeders, and you can put a capsaicin product out there to keep the squirrels away, and the birds will still come and eat it because they are not as sensitive. And with insects, they often will have very fragrant flowers because that attracts the insects. Flower shape, tubular. If you think about hummingbirds and how they feed, that obviously makes sense because they have very long beaks. Nectar accessibility, pollination, obviously you don't have hairs and stuff like that like you would on an insect, but you do have feathers, so the pollen's going to stick to that. Anyway, birds are pretty efficient because they can fly a lot faster and a lot further than insects can. But yeah, this is kind of just an interesting breakdown of the differences between insects and the birds. All right, pollination mechanisms. So kind of going through how does it work for a bird versus an insect. Most of us know that if an insect lands where the pollen is, that usually it's going to get caught on the little hairs on them. Think of a bumblebee or a carpenter bee, and then they move on to the next flower, and then that mingles with that flower's pollen, and so on and so forth as they move around. And so that's how they're pollinating the flowers. So for birds, they're going to be attracted to those reddish, orangish, and yellowish flowers for food and nectar. They don't really smell stuff. So those flowers aren't going to have a lot of scent. But the bird's going to stick its little beak or head down in there to try to reach the nectar. It'll have its little tongue. It's going to brush against those anthers. That's where the pollen is located. It's going to pick it up on its feathers. If you've ever looked closely at a little hummingbird, sometimes you can see that. And then it's going to fly to the next flower. And flower to flower to flower, and so pretty much the same way as it works for insects, it's just a little bit faster because they move a lot faster. So geographic distribution. So I've mentioned that here in North America, we don't have a very high diversity of birds as pollinators, that most of what you're going to see are going to be probably more in the tropical regions. So, in the tropical and the subtropical regions, which are going to be your green colors, you're going to have a very high diversity, so lots of different species, but you're also going to have a very high specialization rate or speciation, which means that they are very specialized in a niche, which also means that they are very susceptible to declining populations based on any type of a climate change, any type of man interference, where they come in for agriculture, that kind of thing. So you'll have a lot that are up in that have now been kind of relegated to these tropical mountain ranges and forests, where they're not really good habitat for humans, but that's where, they have left to go. You have your oceanic islands. It's going to be Australia, Tasmania, Indonesia, some of those. Uh, lots of insect diversity, and islands also like the Hawaiian Islands. I don't want to leave that off in New Zealand. Um, you have a lot of speciation there. I mean, Hawaii has a lot of really beautiful honey creepers and some of the others, and due to invasive species getting there, the mongoose, snakes, things like that, they have really decimated the populations of these animals, these little birds, due to the, unfortunate introduction of these invasive species. So you have to be careful about that too. Then you have your semi-arid and arid regions like in Africa, parts of Turkey, Mongolia, that kind of thing. And um, you're going to have aloe and a lot of desert type cacti that bloom, I guess, trumpet vines, things like that. And here you'll have a lot of hummingbirds, honey eaters, and even a dove. And then you have temperate zones. Those are going to be like your Canada, China, on up into Russia, some of the northern, the EU countries, and up into some of the colder areas up there. So very few bird pollinators up in this area. As I mentioned, most of them are going to be located in your temperate and your tropical, but most of them in the tropical and semi-tropical. So that's just how it is. So flower adaptations, again, lots of, I'm not going to go into each and every one of these, but really bright colors. We talked about which ones, the reds, the oranges, the yellows, tubular shapes, because you've got a long beak, they got to be able to reach down in there. A really sturdy structure, because while hummingbirds can hover, not really the others can't. They prefer to land and then be able to feed. So weak or no fragrance because they don't really need that. And very sticky or spiny pollen, meaning it's going to stick to their slick feathers. And uh, the dilute nectar, but that's probably less of an issue. Just a volume, I guess, is what I'm getting at. So here's some examples of plants that you can grow in your backyard. So bird pollinated plants like trumpet vine that grows. It's a native here. It is, I'm not going to call it, it's a very fast grower, so you have to be careful about where you plant it. But it is big, you can see it all the way around out there. I have tons of it in my yard. It just showed up. Crossvine is also another good one that's not on here. Salvia, that's a very vivid color, very attractant. Fuchsia, a lot of times, if you'll get baskets of that, having it hang from your porch, you'll get a lot of hummingbirds that'll hang around there. Columbine, penstemon, hibiscus, both the hardy and the tropical versions here, aloe, And then I'm not even going to try to pronounce that Hawaiian name. Yeah, I would probably be better if I lived there. Given the weather, I'd really rather be living there right now. It's a little cold for me. So, are birds better pollinators? Well, that's a good question. So, as I mentioned, speciation, they have very specialized structures. So, if you look at birds, their beaks are very specialized depending on what they feed on. And you can look at a bird and look at that beak and pretty much be able to tell what they feed on. So, very long tubular flowers, hummingbirds are just built for that, right? And the hovering ability, again, most of these are going to be hummingbirds because that's mostly what we see here in North America. But they can hover mid-air. They're very small. Wings can beat up to 80 times a second. It's really pretty cool. And they also, just like insects, have that ultraviolet vision. You can see a difference there. I mentioned the nectar guides, and you can see the example of the purpley white one is what it looks like under UV light. And um, you can see why. So humans are going to have the three cone types in our vision. So you're going to have red, greens, and blues. This is called trichromatic vision. But birds have four cone types. So red, blue, green, and UV. We don't have the UV. That's tetrachromatic vision. And then some species may even have a fifth type, meaning pentachromatic vision. So, you know, you can see those with the assistance of a camera or a setting on your camera, that kind of thing. But we don't have that UV setting, if you will. So birds and other pollinators are going to be able to tell that UV nectar guide, but we have to have a black light or something like that to see that. And they're all coded differently. The brain codes them differently. So it's kind of all, it's natural for them where it isn't for us. They have a great memory. I mean, if I know they have the joke bird brain, but it's a lot better than a bug. I mean, I think we can probably all agree on that. So hummingbirds have mental flower maps that they create, flower locations in and around a yard or wherever they're living, and they know when to come back and when to feed. So I am lucky enough that in my yard, I have a very heavily wooded yard. I actually had a hummingbird nest that this last summer, and we had a couple of eggs, and ultimately one hummingbird came of that. It was right off of a walkway down to where I go to take care of my chickens and where I have a lot of flowers. So I was able to kind of watch. And I watched the parents as they would flit around, and they had the same pattern every day. They would leave at certain times, and I could watch them on the weekends when I was here. I would watch them, and they would go off and feed, and then they would come back. And it was pretty cool to watch that. But they knew where they were going. They had their little map, their little path. They would go out and feed in the flowers out where my garden is, and then they would come back and feed their baby. It was kind of interesting. They can travel a lot longer distances than most insects. So that's how you end up with, birds on a Hawaiian island. They fly there, that's how you end up. You've got hummingbirds that migrate down to Mexico. You do have monarchs that do that, but the birds are a little more efficient at it. They can get there quicker. Weather resilience. So if you have a hurricane or something like that that's coming through, I mean, we know that decimates monarch populations and other butterfly populations. Birds have the ability to get out of the way, and or maybe a little more resilient to high winds and such. So plus they have the higher body temperature and the waterproof feathers. So they may be live a little bit longer and be able to get to shelter and help themselves a little bit more than an insect. And then the bigger thing here, and this is a plus and a minus, is the coevolution with plants. So it's interesting because you can see the sickle bill down there in the bottom, that it has a bill that is, it only feeds on that one particular flower because it's adapted for that. So high speciation rates, and that's due to the isolation of the flowers and the birds. But it is very interesting. It's very interesting for genetic selection. All right, so tropical versus arid. Again, we're just going to kind of buzz through these. So, in tropical regions, just kind of as a general rule, you're going to see probably much higher species diversity. You're going to have a lot more variation in the species diversity, whereas you may only have one or two in an arid region. And a lot of that has to do with the amount of food and the abundance of that food versus in an arid region, you just don't have a lot of it. So, some of it's common sense, obviously, but pollination strategy, very specialized, co-evolved with particular plants. Where in a desert situation, sometimes you get water, sometimes you don't, sometimes you get blooms, sometimes you don't. So more generalist and opportunistic. And you therefore you don't have as many birds and you don't have as many species because food is not a given. You don't know. Flower traits, similar, but obviously, cacti flowers tend to be much flatter. So you're probably not going to have many hummingbirds that are doing that. Behavior, perching versus hovering, migratory. So much more so migratory in a arid setting because you're going to have to follow the rains very much like you think about the rains in Africa. I forget the song, Toto. Anyway, birds are going to have to do that too. They're going to have to follow the rains essentially because without it, there's no food for them. And population density low versus high in a tropical area. Um, so just, desert situation, you're just not going to find a lot of diversity. In the higher you go up in mammals, birds, and all of that, you're lacking a lot of the things that life needs. All right, now we're going to jump into the different types of pollinating birds, and we're going to talk a little bit about them and different diversity traits, where they're located, that kind of stuff. So here's where you're going to get to learn about the different classes of species of birds. Now, keep in mind that I've got, I think, 5 classes here. I'm not going to go into all the different species. I'll have a few on here so you can see what their names are. But generally speaking, there's going to be a lot more of them here than what you see. If you're interested, you can always go take a look. eBird is a good website. You can go and you can really dive in and get distribution maps and look at all sorts of different species. And they have pictures and good information on them. And they also have a birding app that is a good one too. So you can use that for around locally. And then if you decide to go on a trip someplace, you can take it and go look for your birding list there as well. Okay, so lorikeets, native, and you can see there in the map, it's going to be like Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam. Most of them are going to be located there. Obviously, lorikeets are also in the pet trade. Um, so there's about 50 to 53 species. There's not a ton of them. Some of them there are more, some are less. But they're very pretty birds, which is unfortunately one of the reasons why the pet industry has kind of decided that they like them. Very pretty birds, and they eat nectar, pollen, fruits, insects. They're generalists. They're not just specifically pollinators. Sometimes accidental pollinators, but they'll eat. They're just kind of vegetarian, so they're going to get out there and eat whatever they can. Tongue adaptation, so they have little papillae on their tongue, and that helps for nectar feeding. So as they feed, they go off to another flower, feed on that, and that's how they're pollinating. So very social, very intelligent. They will often group up with large groups. Um, and so you'll hear them out there in flocks and communal roosts, and a very stable population. So they don't have any issues with breeding. They're fairly generalist in their diet, so that helps them immensely. And again, the illegal pet trade, as I mentioned, that's a big one. But you fortunately that's going to be one that you'll have to watch for a while. Logging and agriculture, of course, is going to reduce some of the nesting areas, but and then invasive species, that's a big one for birds. I don't think that really matters what type of bird species you're talking about. Rats and cats and other feral bees, um, yeah, can cause problems. And so kind of limited ranges. Some of them are very much more generalist. Some of them are very specific in their habitat. So it kind of depends on the particular species you're talking about. But yeah, lorikeets, I think they're kind of interesting and very pretty. Next up, honey eaters. So honey eaters can be look very different. So honey eaters, there's 192 species in Australasia, so Australia and then Southeast Asia. So even a much more contracted uh, distribution than what we just looked at. That yeah, the lorikeets. So they've got what we call convergent evolution. So they resemble, and I might have some pictures of some flower peckers, sunbirds and honey eaters. They eat the same thing, so they have similar traits like beak and other things that are due to their feeding styles, but they are not from the same, they're divergent, in other words. So they're two separate species. They didn't come from the same line, but they have very similar looks about their beaks and how they feed because of what they're eating, if that makes sense. So beak variety, very short and stout. There's a lot more variety here than there is in like a hummingbird beak. Coloration all over the map. Boldly colored, like you see the honey eater up in the top right, all the way down to very muted in that honey eater, the New Caledonian honey eater, which is kind of a looks more like a goldfinch a little bit than a bright red bird. Very vocal, they sing a lot, and very aggressive feeders. So these guys they're nomads, they follow the blooms in the trees. So you may have them at some point if you were living in a more tropical location, and then they're gone for half the season and then they come back again. So they're fairly stable generally. They're fairly widespread. There are, of course, a few species that are that are not generalists. They're very species specific on what they feed on, and so those are endangered. And that's going to be because of the typicals, your habitat loss, endangered species, or sorry, invasive species, some type of altering of flowering cycles that has caused some issue. The birds aren't learning as quickly. And then hybridization, which is a thing. So some particular species of birds, you see that more often than not, where they're close enough genetically that you can get birds breeding out, and so you've just got a general hybrid species, and you don't have the pure genetic strain anymore. Honey creepers. So honey creepers are, I know there's all these honeys in there. South America and Central America, Hawaiian honey creepers as well. Um, Possibly came from Asia. So this is an adaptive radiation and how they kind of spread out. So there's 50 species, give or take, and they all have similar looks about them again because not the same genetic distribution. They didn't all come from the same line, but they have similar looks to their beaks because they all are feeding on the same thing roughly, and so they have a similar look about them. So South America, Central America, and Hawaii. And then they do a lot of seed cracking and nectar feeding. And so their beaks, if you look at some of the selection of the birds that I have here, you've got a crossbill down there, a scarlet honey creeper. Again, these are all in the same family. And I'm not going to try the name on that one, the Achypoloa. I'm sure if I lived there, it'd be a lot It'd sound a lot better. But you've got a variety in their beaks and how they feed. Coloration, again, kind of all over the map here. So some of them bright red, like that scarlet honeycreeper, some of them yellow, and some of them just a very muted brownish color. So just a variety. Some of these now look at the islands, and some of them are going to be, as they consider here, an extinction crisis because they are not generalists. These guys are, they evolved in a very specialized setting, a very specialized niche, and there's a lot of growth on Hawaii. What used to be a wild and beautiful island, now man has decided that they like that too. And a lot of agriculture in South America and Central America. And so their habitat has just been decimated. You also have rats and wild pigs and mosquitoes. Avian malaria is a thing. So you're going to see that pop up here. Just like the bird flu you see in chickens, it can mutate. It can affect certain birds more than others. And in this case, you've got avian malaria, and that's killed off a lot of them. And then some climate change, allowing mosquitoes to move into further elevations that they didn't previously have to worry about before. So there are some things that humans are doing to try to help control the mosquito issue. But yes, it's these little guys, they are 17 confirmed extinct and others critically endangered. So you may want to try to go see them while you still can. Sunbirds. Okay, so very beautiful. You've got a splendid sunbird down there. So parts of Africa, parts of, well, Australia, Southeast Asia, African roots. That's where you're going to find a lot of them. And these guys have their similarities to hummingbirds. They do to a convergent evolution. So they feed on the same thing, nectar. So they're going to have some very similar adaptations for that. These guys don't hover like hummingbirds do, they perch because they're bigger. So they have to be a sturdier, more, and if you think about a lot of the tropical blooms that are out there, birds of paradise and some of the other types of blooms, those are what they're feeding on. Pollen transfer, again, just sticking their face in there to get the nectar, and then they get the pollen on their face. Diversity, beak adaptations, long and curved. You can see that down there. And the flowers that it's feeding out of, that's going to be adapted. That bird coevolution, they, basically grew up together. That flower needs that particular bird to pollinate it. Lots of pretty colors. Look at the plumage on that. I mean, that's about as brilliant as you can get. Very pretty. We don't typically see that, excluding hummingbirds in North America. Uh, Endangered. Yeah, there's a couple of them that are endangered, some that are vulnerable, but not all of them. So some of them are in a better situation. The mainland type birds, those are better situated than all of them, the two in the endangered species. And those are going to be your island, like you've got Madagascar and some of the Seychelles and some of the like Bali and Indonesia, some of those. A lot of disruption from humans there. So that's going to be where you see the issues the most through fragmentation in their populations and some, and in this case, the narrow ecological niches that I've talked about. All right, Orioles. This is one that we actually have here in North America. So Orioles are pollinators. We don't have a lot of them here. You'll see them occasionally, but you'll see them more up in the Northeast and up into the Midwest. So they're kind of broken down. There's New World and Old World Orioles. So you've got New World Orioles in the Americas here, and that's going to be your Baltimores, your Bullocks, and your Orchard Orioles. And then your New and Old World Orioles in Europe, Asia, and Africa. So they're not really as closely related because of that convergent evolution, but they do look very similar. So, of course, these guys have a fairly varied diet. It's not just nectar. You get insects and fruit. If you feed birds, you'll know you can put oranges out, and these guys are perfectly happy to come and eat that as well as grubs. They like those too. Um, so they'll a little interesting tidbit of information. Some species use gaping to feed. So that is like a tool. So if they need to get into something, they'll put their beak in there, a closed beak, into the fruit or wood or the plant, and then open their beak up really hard, and it pries that material apart so that they can get the stuff in there. So they've figured out how to feed, which is kind of interesting. So they're one of the more brilliantly colored birds in North America. We don't have very many of them, but this is one of them. They're very pretty with their yellows and oranges and blacks. They are sexually dimorphic. That simply means that the male and the female look different. A lot of the case, um, that's the case through a lot of birds, female and male species here, and the female is a little bit larger. So, um, as far as conservation status, not a ton of them here, and there is some habitat loss, surprisingly to cowbird parasitism. So cowbirds, a very annoying species of bird that doesn't like to parent its own offspring and will go lay its eggs in other birds' nests, pushes the other bird's eggs out, lays its own eggs, and then the parent bird raises the cowbird's young. Yeah, it's really sad. So there are some programs that are out there where that they're trying some different things to help control that. But yeah. So pesticide use, also herbicides can harm their food sources. And um, in this case, the Bahama oriole, which is down in the islands, is becoming endangered due to habitat degradation. So you're talking about most of these, the ones that are in danger are going to be island type birds. So banana quits. Banana quits can be found in and around Caribbean islands into Central America, South and Central America, and kind of up into Haiti, Cuba, and maybe parts of Florida, although not so sure about that. West Indies, basically. So 40 species across the Caribbean and South Central America. They're nectar feeding. You can kind of see it in their beak. But these guys prefer hibiscus flowers, bananas, heliconias, and other tropical flowers. So they are vital to the production or the reproduction of some of these, because you remember a banana. um, they are not really of any concern that population-wise, these guys are doing just fine. We don't really have many issues with them. They have adapted to living around man. So these guys are not in any danger. As well as, and they're just not I mean, 40 recognized subspecies, so there's quite a few of them out there, but they're doing just fine. So some habitat loss, but generally speaking, one of the few groups of birds that's doing pretty good. Flower peckers. So this was one I kind of chuckled at the name, but they're pretty little birds. So these guys are found Southeast Asia, parts of North Australia, into Indonesia, and that generalized area. So about 56 species. These guys are going to eat mistletoe berries, nectar, and some of them you can see are definite for feeding on the mistletoe. They have a much blunter beak, and they disperse those seeds out there. So conservation status, pretty resilient, not really considered threatened. You'll note some of these have a lot of information in my compilation of the information, and some of them don't have a lot of information. So these last couple, the last one will be a hummingbird, and we'll talk more about that one. But yeah, these guys, not a lot of information out there. So, but definitely pretty. So, like, look at the crimson-breasted flower pecker. I mean, that's a really pretty bird. And just your typical same issues that you have, habitat loss, especially in islands and with mountain species. So you just, maybe go out on some bird watching in the tropics this coming vacation cycle. So doves, this is one that didn't even think about, wasn't even on my radar. But these little guys live in more arid regions. So remember, we were talking about arid versus tropical, and you don't have many birds as pollinators in arid regions. This is one of the few. So this dove lives, this is literally just one white-winged dove. That's it. And it lives up in the the desert Southwest, Arizona, up there all the way into South America, and it's all arid regions. So they're the primary pollinators of the saguaro cacti in the Sonoran Desert. So talk about very specialized, right? And they time their arrival with blooming saguaros, and that means you can't throw too much off because if you do, then and through climate change, whatever differing changes in weather patterns, that's going to cause the dove to miss when the flowering period is, and then no food and no reproduction for the saguaros. So they do feed on seeds, though. So they have adapted somewhat. You can see they're trending up. They had been hunted for a period in habitat loss, but they're starting to figure it out. I won't call them one of the urban coyotes or deer or armadillos or the things that have really figured out how to adapt well to being around people, but they are figuring it out better. So, yay for them and that they've learned to deal with humans and still thrive. But they're kind of a grayish plumage. They look like a typical dove, blue eyes with a kind of a red ring around it. So pretty in their own way. Yeah, most of it is just habitat fragmentation and hunting. They are hunted out west. So here in the Midwest and down in the South, you've got the mourning dove, and those are hunted. But out west, you have these guys, the white-winged dove, that are hunted on. And last, but certainly not least, we have our hummingbirds. That is probably the one that we see the most of here in North America. And worldwide, they are one of the most brilliantly colored in their plumage of all the birds that are pollinators. And so they're native to Australia, New Guinea, Southeast Asia. I mean, pretty much, I don't have a map here because I didn't really figure it was necessary because literally the whole thing was lit up. They are all over the place. Now, not the same species, of course. You've got different species depending on where you are, but they are all over the place with the exception of like Antarctica or something like that. I mean, there are tons of them. There's 366 species. So if you remember some of them, the lorikeets and some of the others, it was like 30 species or 50 species, 366 species of these guys. But even though there's a lot of different species, there are still a lot of them that have gone through a lot of speciation, and they are not generalists. They are very specialists in their habitat. And so because of that, you're seeing upwards of 250 species of those, 68% of them are declining due to habitat loss and food availability, which is sad. So you see a lot of these in tropical areas, islands, that kind of thing, and due to agriculture, you'll have fragmentation in their agriculture just taking out large swaths of their habitat. It's becoming more of a problem. And then you also have pesticides exposure, and of course, invasive species. You have dealing with cats and snakes and stuff like that. Some of them just out competing them for resources. So yeah, some of them are dealing with challenges for sure. So most of us are going to know how they work. They have a very long beak. They hover and feed that way. They're one of the few birds. Their little metabolism is very impressive. So they will eat insects. They've got to have protein. They don't just eat only nectar. They will eat bugs and other things that they can, as much as they can get in them, because their little metabolisms are off the scale. So they will go into kind of a torpor, which means like a resting hibernation, where their bodily functions drop. And that's to help conserve energy because they would just simply burn up if they didn't do that. Coloration wise, around here we mostly see the ruby throat. You might see another migratory species. We have like, I don't know, it's like five or six or seven, maybe eight different species out on the West Coast, but we really don't get them here unless by accident, really. We really only have the ruby throated hummingbird here. So, unfortunately, they're still very pretty, but that's basically the only one that you will really see here on the eastern side of the continent. The males will have very vivid, what we call gorgets, or the little throat patches with the feathers there. Obviously, they're using that to attract the female. The females will be very muted in color, and that's so that they don't draw attention to themselves when they're sitting on the nest. Much like most of the rest of these animals, these other types of birds, these guys co-evolved with flowers so that the flower shape is very similar to what their beak is. And that is, pretty much the rule for all of these. So it's kind of interesting. I wish we had more of these pretty little guys out here on the East Coast, more of the different variety. Just sometimes I like to share things that I've seen. I went out to visit my aunt in Washington State many years ago, and we were just driving along the coastline, and it was time for lunch, so we drove kind of inland in I think it was a state park. There was a lodge there, and we had lunch. I wanted to sit out on the porch because it overlooked this really beautiful mountain lake. I mean, very gorgeous, and the weather was perfect, but it was already busy out there, so we didn't get that. So they put us next to the hummingbird feeders, and they had handouts that you had, laminated handouts that listed all the different species of hummingbirds that they had. And you could sit there and watch. They had, I don't know, six or seven feeders outside the windows. So many hummingbirds. I mean, each feeder must have had between 20 and 30 hummingbirds. I think I counted all the species. They were all there. They were so beautiful. I mean, I didn't even want to leave. I was like, nah, can we just live here? Because I really just want to watch these birds. They were so pretty. So yeah, I'd like to go back there. That was very, very fun. Birding is not like the top of my list, but I do enjoy uh, some bird watching. And if I see anything interesting out there, the squirrels have foiled me. I just have too many trees, so I don't feed them because birdseed is kind of expensive now. But I did for quite a while keep a list of all the different bird species that I had seen. All right, so conservation efforts, what can we do? Protecting natural habitats, most of this is going to just be really common sense. Uh, you've got the Georgia Green Landscape. Occasionally, I'll give, and I think the next batch of webinars is going to have some of these in there. But you can actually get this really pretty metal sign. Just have to go through and look at all of the metrics, and most people, if you like any kind of anything to do with pollinators or birds or flowers or whatever, your yard's going to qualify. So make sure that you're providing what they need, the types of flowers that they need, water, that kind of thing. Restore native plant communities. So wherever you are, whatever you have in that habitat, try to restore that so that you have some of that. Get rid of the native species, the invasive species. Get rid of your privet. Get rid of your English ivy. Get rid of your Bradford pear. All that those nasty plants. Get them out of there. Support private landowners through this Georgia Green Landscape, and monitor the pollinators. So I mean, you can go out and kind of do your own bird watching. Most of the monarchs and birds, the hummingbirds, there are websites dedicated to tracking them. So if you get involved with that, then you too can help. You're being a citizen scientist, which is a great thing. I mean, I can't impress the fact that we need that more than anything. I mean, yeah, you've got grad students, you've got researchers that are doing it, but really you need to have the general public out there too. Maintaining migration corridors. So that's very important too. Most of these plants and these insects and these birds are going to have their own migratory routes. So having, if here where we are, we're kind of right on the fringes of those, but still planting things that are going to benefit them, they do come through. So having that available is very important. So preserving habitats, stopover habitats for migratory routes, mapping and protecting the flyways. There's, projects going on for that. And um, educating the communities along the migration routes so that they're doing the right things, reducing pesticides, being careful at certain times of the year, planting native species that these birds and these insects can use, and then cooperative international cooperation between different nations because a lot of these like monarchs some of them end up down in Mexico. Hummingbirds, same thing, Central America. So having cooperative type of agreements for research purposes is very important. Research and policy advocacy. So, you've got a lot of conservation groups that are out there that are trying to get stronger protections. So that's a good thing. And we need to keep that. So if you feel inclined to do that, definitely you should. Don't just wait for somebody else to do it. If you have the time and you have the desire, get involved with the fight. And so some of the examples like Fish and Wildlife Service, pollinator action plans, Great Pollinator Census is an easy way to do it around here through UGA. That helps track and population status, monitoring pesticide impacts, collaborative research, things like that. You see some options down there. You can learn a little more about the Great Pollinator Census if that's something that you're interested in. It's the same time every year, so whatever that is in 2026, it'll be there again. Conservation efforts, make sure you got some gardens. Key practices, plant those native species. Try to minimize your pesticide use and be careful about when you use them. Provide the water sources and keep nesting materials around. Learn what they use because different birds use different things and they nest in different places. So you need to, maybe if you can, have all of the above and try to give them plenty of places to hide. So layer that vegetation. It needs to be more dense. I know sometimes we have only a handful of trees in our yard if you've got a newer yard, but you can definitely plant and over time it will evolve into something that's that way. All right, so what do you do now? Okay, well, you can create a bird-friendly garden. Choose your native plants, design for continual bloom. So you see up there, you've got a bloom chart in the top right, and it lists the different plants and when they bloom, and you want them all to overlap so that you've got food available all the time. Mix your trees and your shrubs and your perennials so that you've got all sorts of different stuff out there and you've got habitat for them to live in. Plants that bloom, all seasons. We're really have the benefit of temperate weather down here. Use it. Offer water sources. And that's good for insects and for birds. And keep it clean. You want to try to make sure that you're always keeping it clean. Shelter and nesting sites. So again, as you've got the different layers of vegetation and you've got the cover, make sure you have birdhouses if you need to, native trees. Try to mimic as much as you can so that you can offer what they need. Avoid pesticides if you can. Of course, at Extension, we espouse IPM, integrated pest management. So while chemicals are not crossed off the list entirely, we do encourage folks to use all sorts of other techniques for getting rid of weeds and getting rid of disease and insects and stuff like that before you get to the point where you need to use some type of synthetic pesticide. Support migratory corridors. So if you are in a flyway, and we do get some folks that watch from other states, you may be in a flyway. Here we're not really right on the side of one, but yeah, you need to support those corridors. So as those animals are moving back and forth, they have those native flowers for the nectar. Support diversity in flower shapes. So get a variety of plants. You can see here the different shapes, funnels and trumpets and rosettes and pom-poms. Have a little bit of all of them. I mean, that's going to be a really pretty garden, and it's going to be great for the birds and the insects. And then allow some wild space too, because um, that's where you'll see shelter. That's where they see shelter. So here's a list, and remember, if you want these lists, I'll have my email address at the end of this. But you can see here, this is a lot of the stuff I just get off the line. I mean, hummingbirds, caterpillars, butterflies. Don't forget about the host plants for the caterpillars for their future butterflies and bees. And that is basically it. So I zoomed over some things, but if you are interested and you would like a copy of this particular presentation, you can email me at the GwinnettCounty.com email there. I'm happy to send you a PDF of that. If you want to watch um, this again, or if you want to catch some of the others that I've done that you haven't been able to for whatever reason, that Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel that has all of my recordings. I think everything should be up now, so everything is available. And then if you just happen to come across this particular webinar and you're like, oh, I want to see what else is coming up, you can check out the QR code on the left under the little hummingbird and look at the other events and classes. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I don't see any questions in there. Not a lot of questions on this one. Mostly it's just kind of a generalized, this is what's out here. Maybe you weren't aware of all of these wonderful birds that are out there as pollinators. And now hopefully you are, and there's a lot more out there and that you actually can do some for conservation purposes, which is great. Or maybe I inspired you to do some traveling and add to your bird list because there's a lot of stuff to see out there. I've been to some of the Central American countries. I've been to Costa Rica and Mexico, and I've seen some of the really pretty tropical birds and the islands. And yeah, I miss it. I like our birds around here, but yeah, some of them are definitely inspiring. So, all right. I don't see any questions here. So if that is it, then I am going to go ahead and stop sharing. And that's basically it. So I wish you all a good evening and Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, all of that stuff. And I will see you all. I may have one before the end of the year, but most likely it's after the first of the year. So have a good evening. Bye.